Hello, good morning, and welcome. My name is Dan Evans, and as the designated federal official for NASA's Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Independent Study Team, I'd like to call this meeting to order and introduce the panelists. In the back row, we have Nadia Drake, Paula Bontempi, Federica Bianco, David Grinspoon, Carlin Toner, Josh Sameta, and Jennifer Buss. While in the front row, we have Walter Scott, Warren Randolph, Reggie Brothers, Shelley Wright, Scott Kelly, Anna Maria Barea, Mike Gold, and David Spergel, who serves as chair of the team. I have a few opening remarks, but to begin, I'd like to start with the following. First, I'd like to pay tribute to the life of retired Air Force Master Sergeant Sam Sato, who's being laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery today. Following his active duty service, Sam served as the intelligence collection manager for the National Intelligence Manager for Aviation, where he played a critical role in UAP analysis. All of us at NASA offer our condolences to Sam's family, friends, and colleagues. Second, I'd like to take this opportunity to express my profound gratitude to our distinguished panel of experts for their unwavering commitment and dedication. It's disheartening to note that several of them have been subjected to online abuse due to their decision to participate on this panel. And NASA's security team is actively addressing this issue. We at NASA are acutely aware of the considerable public interest in UAP. However, it's critical to understand that any form of harassment towards our panelists only serves to detract from the scientific process, which requires an environment of respect and openness. Now, every member of our team is a recognized authority in their respective field, and they have our unequivocal support. NASA stands in solidarity with them, advocating for a respectful discourse that befits their expertise and the significance of their work. Thanks. Now, in recent years, the subject of unidentified aerial phenomena, nowadays termed unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs, has captured the attention of the public, the scientific community, and the government alike. And it's now our collective responsibility to investigate these occurrences with the rigorous scientific scrutiny that they deserve. NASA Administrator Senator Bill Nelson believes that understanding UAPs is vital for several reasons, which is why he directed this study. First and foremost, it provides an opportunity for us to expand our understanding of the world around us. As an organization dedicated to exploring the unknown, this work is in our DNA. Secondly, this study aims to enhance situational awareness. The presence of UAPs raises concerns about the safety of our skies, and it's this nation's obligation to determine whether these phenomena pose any potential risks to airspace safety. By understanding the nature of UAPs, we can ensure that our skies remain a safe space for all. In order to achieve these goals, it is crucial that we employ a scientific lens for our UAP work. It's precisely this rigorous, evidence-based approach that allows one to separate fact from fiction. This team is comprised of experts from various disciplines, which allows them to approach this work from multiple perspectives. And we have greatly benefited from that collective expertise. Now, why do we value a scientific approach? It's because science is built on evidence. It thrives on scrutiny. It demands reproducibility, and above all, objectivity. When we approach UAPs from a scientific perspective, we do not come in with an agenda. We come in needing a roadmap. Indeed, the primary objective of this incredible team of experts is not to go back and look at grainy footage of UAPs, but rather to give us a roadmap to guide us for future analysis. And this is the very scientific method that NASA holds true to its heart. Scientific research is intended to be publicly available and transparent, and NASA prides itself on making its data and images available to the public to learn and explore on their own. By holding public meetings like this one, we aim for open and honest dialogue with the public. We recognize that public interest in UAPs is high and that the demand for answers is strong. Conversations like this one are the first step to reducing the stigma surrounding UAP reporting. Moreover, transparency is essential for fostering trust between NASA, the public, and the scientific community. In order to do things right, we must work together, pooling our resources, our knowledge, and our expertise. And by maintaining open channels of communication, we can facilitate collaboration, encourage the exchange of ideas, and ensure that our work is as robust as possible. Not only that, but our commitment to openness is in itself a reflection of NASA's commitment to scientific integrity. As an organization dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge, it is NASA's responsibility to be honest and forthright and to follow the science. And by being transparent in our work, we uphold our dedication to scientific excellence. The meeting today represents the first deliberative actions that the team has taken. And so it's important to keep in mind that they still have several months of work ahead of them. Their final report will be released this summer, and we will publish it on our website. NASA believes that the study of unidentified anomalous phenomena represents an exciting step forward in our quest to uncover the mysteries of the world around us. By embracing a scientific lens, we ensure that our work is rigorous and reliable, and by valuing transparency and openness, we can foster trust and collaboration with the public. Simply put, this is why we do what we do. Now, before I introduce Nikki, there are a few administrative matters to attend to. Firstly, the Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Independent Study Team has been established in accordance with the Federal Advisory Committee Act, known as FACA. Its parent committee is the Earth Science Advisory Committees. As such, this group does not report to the government. It reports to the Earth Science Advisory Committee, who will debate the recommendations and formally transmit this team's report to the government. Next, our deliberative committee meetings, such as this one, are open to the public. And also, after this panel was convened, the National Defense Authorization Act, known as the NDAA, changed the A in UAP to be anomalous. Accordingly, this panel's remit was expanded to encompass not just aerial UAP. However, the majority of UAP sightings to date have been in the aerial domain. So it's fair to say that this panel's focus is on the aerial aspect of anomalous. Now, in compliance with the FACA federal statute, formal minutes have been taken throughout the meeting today, and these meetings and these minutes are for the public record, and hence all presentations and discussions and comments by the committee members should be considered to be on the record. Each member of this UAP study team has been appointed because of their specific subject matter expertise as individuals, and hence each member is subject to federal ethics laws. This category of appointment is called Special Government Employees, or SGEs, for our non-government members, and our two federal employees serve as regular government employees, known as RGEs. Now, to the panel. All members on this committee should remember to recuse themselves if a topic comes up in which you have a potential conflict of interest between your financial interests, including those of your employer, and matters that we're discussing. And then finally, panel, if you have any ethics questions, please see me separately, and if needed, I'll put you in contact with a NASA ethics attorney. Thanks for bearing with me. I'd now like to turn to the amazing Dr. Nikki Fox, Associate Administrator for NASA's Science Mission Directorate. Over to you, Nikki.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you to all the members of NASA's UAP Independent Study Team. Your selfless dedication to the pursuit of knowledge is just so commendable. And I want to thank you, the audience, for tuning in today to watch our first deliberative meeting of NASA's Independent Study Team on evaluating and categorizing unidentified anomalous phenomena. Before I begin, though, I really do want to double down on Dan's words that it is really disheartening to hear of the harassment that our panelists have faced online, all because they're studying this topic. NASA stands behind our panelists, and we do not tolerate abuse. Harassment only leads to further stigmatization of the UAP field, significantly hindering the scientific progress and discouraging others to study this important subject matter. Your harassment also obstructs the public's right to knowledge. Our panelists are leading experts in the scientific, aeronautics, and data analytics communities. We are very lucky to have them on board to share their invaluable insights to inform NASA on what possible data could be collected in the future and how it can be collected to help us better understand the nature of UAP. The UAP independent study was commissioned to create a roadmap on how to use the tools of science to evaluate and categorize the nature of UAPs going forward. This roadmap, of course, will help the federal government obtain usable data to explain the nature of future UAPs. Transparency, openness, and scientific integrity are pinnacle to NASA's mission. They're at the forefront of this public meeting and have been throughout the team's 7 months on this study. As Dan noted, this is a working meeting, and so the public will have the incredible opportunity to witness the process of science in action. At NASA, we lead the world in exploration and are committed to rigorous scientific inquiry. The nature of science is to better understand the unknown, and to do that, our scientists need data. Right now, there is a very limited number of high-quality observations and data curation of UAP. The existing data available from eyewitness reports are often muddled and cannot provide conclusive evidence that supports UAP recognition and analysis. Additionally, an object's background can complicate the data further and render it unusable due to conventional objects that can mimic or overshadow the phenomena completely, such as commercial aircraft, military equipment, the weather, and ionospheric phenomena like auroras. This lack of high-quality data make it impossible to draw scientific conclusions on the nature of UAP. Now, this team has used unclassified data from civilian government entities, commercial data, and data from other sources to inform their recommendations. And as Dan noted, they will be published in a public report that comes out this summer. I want to emphasize that there is really great benefit to studying unclassified data rather than classified data for this study. First, unidentified anomalous phenomena sightings themselves are not classified. It's often the sensor platform that is classified. And you can kind of think of it, if a fighter jet took a picture of the Statue of Liberty, then that image would be classified, not because of the subject in the picture, but because of the sensors on the plane. Second, unclassified data make it possible for our team to communicate openly to advance our understanding of UAP, not only with each other, but across the scientific community and to the public. This ensures a clear and transparent pipeline of information that can be built upon through generations to expand our understanding. This study relies on open data. Everything we use at NASA is open, and anyone can look at these records. So I invite you to visit our open data portal at data.nasa.gov to comb through our tens of thousands of data sets that are free and fully accessible to the public. Additionally, please check out data.gov/open/data for a great overview of where you can find the archives for our science and mission data sites. I am very, very much looking forward to hearing the deliberations put forth today from our distinguished panel of experts. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. Before you go, I just want to open up to questions. Let me start with a question on this on the NASA data. I think one of the important things that we'll be looking at with other data sets and events is the data is not very well calibrated. Can you say just a little bit about how NASA goes through calibrating some of its earth science data?
Oh, yes. We very, very rigorous earth science. I mean, all of our data sets, not just earth science, go through extremely rigorous calibration. We don't release anything until it's really perfect. I mean, we have quick look data that is marked as quick look data. So, you know, you can use it to get preliminary findings, but wait for the really nicely cleaned up data. So a lot of rigorous protocol in putting out our data to make sure it is perfect.
Do we have any other questions from the panel?
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay. Over to you.
Hi, I'm David Spergel. I'm the chair of the panel. And when I look at our chart, we have a lengthy chart, but the high-level summary of it is how can NASA contribute to understanding the nature of UAPs? And our role here is not to resolve the nature of these events, but rather to give NASA guidance, to provide a roadmap of how it can contribute in this area. After my opening remarks, we'll hear from Sean Kirkpatrick from the AARO, and it's the AARO that's charged with leading the whole-of-government UAP effort. And they've already issued some preliminary reports on some of the events. NASA's role is to use its unique capabilities and its role as a civilian agency interacting with the scientific community in an open and transparent manner. And, as Dr. Fox emphasized, the Defense and Intelligence Agency data on UAP are often classified primarily because of how the data is collected, not because what's in the data. If a camera on an F-35 took a picture of a bird, it's classified. If a spy satellite takes an image of a balloon, and we've had in the news some balloons recently, that data is classified. And that's because of a desire to not reveal our technical capabilities to other nations. NASA, on the other hand, operates in a mode where it's collecting data in the open. And the NASA data is available on websites and is well characterized. And because of NASA being the civilian agency studying air and space, it has a special role to play. And I see our charge primarily as helping identify for NASA ways it could play that role and contribute to understanding. We've gone through a preliminary data collection stage. And to summarize some of the things that we've learned, the current data collection efforts regarding UAPs are unsystematic and fragmented across various agencies, often using instruments uncalibrated for scientific data collection. And if I think about the data that people have out there, it's in many ways what we'd like to think of as citizen science. But again, it is uncalibrated data, poorly characterized, not well curated. And we face, looking through this data, a significant background, a background of many of these events are commercial aircraft, civilian and military drones, weather and research balloons, military equipment, ionospheric phenomenon. We need to characterize how, when the data is taken, when it sees events like this first. The current existing data and eyewitness reports alone are insufficient to provide conclusive evidence about the nature and origin of every UAP event. They're often uninformative due to lack of quality control and data curation. To understand UAP better, targeted data collection, thorough data curation, and robust analyses are needed. Such an approach will help to discern unexplained UAP sightings, but even then there's no guarantee that all sightings will be explained. Another challenge in this area is what we call stigma. There's a real stigma among people reporting events. And despite NASA's extensive efforts to reduce this stigma, the origin of the UAPs remain unclear, and we feel many events remain unreported. Commercial pilots, for example, are very reluctant to report anomalies, and one of our goals in having NASA play a role is to remove stigma and get high-quality data. In fact, if I were to summarize in one line what I feel we've learned, it's we need high-quality data. And this is not as a research scientist whose work has been primarily focused in cosmology, I would say the lesson of my career has been you want to address important questions, you need high-quality data with well-calibrated instruments. So let me now introduce the agenda. We're going to hear from a number of experts who will be presenting up to lunch. We'll then break at 12 for lunch from 12 to 12:30. At 12:30, we'll resume, and we'll have presentations by members of the panel on some preliminary ideas for discussion. And that will be a period of time for some open discussion by the panel. We will then have a Q&A session based on questions that have been sent in advance to the website, and we've curated those questions and grouped them together, and we'll be going through a lot of those questions, and then we'll summarize. And then over the subsequent couple months, we'll work on putting together the report, and as Dan said, we're aiming to make a public report available, we hope, by the end of July. So now let me turn this over to Sean Kilpatrick.
Hang on. We'll do a couple Q&As.
Oh, we'll have some Q&As from me?
Yeah,
okay.
From the panel.
Any questions on the panel? Thoughts? Yes. We'll get the mic.
Yeah. So one of the things I think Dr. Fox said was looking at the release of data, very important for our study, when it's high quality. And you have also commented that data are not always perfect when we're doing certain studies. I wonder if you could shed some light on the difference between the application of certain data to certain scientific challenges.
So, when you look at your camera is often designed to take an image in the daytime and might not be optimized for nighttime imaging. Or if you take something that astronomers are very familiar with, is we design our telescopes to work at night. And if the sun is not even if you would never take the Hubble telescope and point it at the sun. This would destroy its detectors. Not only that, if the telescope is pointing there and the sun is over there, even though you're not looking at the sun, reflections off of the optics will produce what we call ghosting. And that kind of ghosting produces some very strange images. And this, one of the many things we need to worry about when we see unusual things taken from a camera is even if you're pointing the camera there, was the sun over there? Those kinds of anomalies degrade the quality of the data. And that's why it's very important to work with well-characterized instruments and to be, using them in ways in which you understand what's going on. So I think if you look at, data taken from the James Webb Telescope or from the Hubble or any of these things, and these are, telescopes looking out in space, you'll see some really, at first funny phenomenon. When a telescope points at a star that's bright, it saturates the detector and puts bleeding down the detector. And you'll see phenomenon like if there's a bright star off to the side of the, not even when you're looking at, you get this effects where light bounces off of dust in your telescope and produces a sort of diffuse image that has some really strange properties. So, when you see something unusual, the first thing you have to do is understand how that data was taken. And I think this is one of the challenges one faces when you have data taken by uncalibrated instruments years ago. It's very hard to know what's taken. It's very hard to draw conclusions. I think that's one of the challenges with archival data. And I think having dedicated, well-calibrated instruments, I think, will be important here as in any other area to understand what's going on.
So, David, anomalies are so often the engine of discovery. Maybe you could say a quick word about high-risk, high-reward research in your field of cosmology and how you see that impacting the UAP study as well.
An area that comes to mind is fast radio bursts. And the Shaw Prize was just announced yesterday, awarded to the discovery of fast radio bursts. And these are these bursting signals that go off all over in space. And it's an interesting story because some of the bursts were real and are fascinating, and some of the bursts, there was a series of bursts observed by this observatory in Australia, and they had really strange structure, and people couldn't figure out what was going on. And then they started to notice a lot of them bunched together around lunchtime. And what had happened was the people at the observatory would heat up their lunch in the microwave. And something they would do is they would open the door of the microwave oven before the microwave stopped. This is bad for your microwave oven. It wears it out. But not only that, it produced a burst of radio signal that was picked up by these sensitive detectors. So this, I think, is an interesting lesson. Some events end up being something unusual and conventional, but some events with these FRBs turn out to be these powerful explosions which are taking place at cosmological distances. Their nature is still not fully understood. I think they're one of the really most fascinating objects we have, these bursts going out all over space. They're interesting probes because they're kind of lighting up space between here and there. And they're a subject of very active research. And if one looks at the history of these FRBs, at first they were discovered, not believed, then finally confirmed. And they were discovered by instruments that were very sensitive but not optimized for this. And now what we're doing is we're optimizing instruments and optimizing software to look for these events. And it's often these surprises that turn out to be most interesting. And, there are phenomena like sprites, which you can think of as upward-going lightning, which were seen by commercial pilots and somewhat not believed, right? Because they were very strange. And it was really only when we were able to take very high-speed imaging data, data taken often from places like the space station, that we were able to see that and learn about these fascinating ionospheric phenomena. So it's surprises are really interesting. I mean, I think this is one of the fascinating things about the UAP phenomenon. If it's something that's anomalous, that makes it interesting and worthy of study. Other questions? Great. So now let me turn over to Sean.
Thank you, David. Dan, it's a pleasure to be back. Good morning, everyone. I want to start by thanking NASA for convening today's UAP Independent Study public meeting and inviting me to continue to participate. NASA has been an invaluable partner to our team at Aero as we work to better understand and respond to unidentified anomalous phenomena. We applaud NASA for commissioning its independent study team and for exploring what data and tools could be leveraged to shed greater light on UAP. Though NASA and Aero are taking on very different aspects of the UAP problem set, our efforts are very much complementary. We both are committed to the scientific method, to a data-driven approach, and the highest standards of scientific research integrity. While NASA is evaluating unclassified data sources for its study, Aero's data set includes classified material with a focus on national security areas. However, all of this data collectively is critical to understanding the nature and origin of UAP. NASA brings unique capabilities, world-class scientists, and a wealth of academic and research linkages. NASA also has access to Earth sensing satellites, radiological sensors, tools for gravitational wave, geomagnetic wave detection, and means for analyzing open source and crowdsourced data that may assist both AERO and NASA in their UAP efforts. We are very grateful for the partnership and welcome the opportunity to join with NASA to share our collective findings with the public as the U.S. government moves towards greater transparency on this issue. Last month, I testified before members of the Senate Armed Services Committee on emerging threats and capabilities and shared some of the progress made since AERO's establishment in July 2022. I discussed AERO's scientific and analytic approaches, its efforts to improve UAP data collection, standardize our reporting processes, leverage our partnerships, and meticulously review the U.S. government's UAP-related historical records. As I told the subcommittee then, the resolution of all UAP cases cannot be accomplished by DoD and the intelligence community alone. AERO's ultimate success will require partnerships with the interagency, industry, academia, the scientific community, and the public, which all bring their own resources, ideas, and expertise to the UAP challenge. We believe robust collaboration and peer review across a broad range of partners will promote greater objectivity and transparency in the study of UAP. Of course, NASA's UAP independent study team was convened very much in that spirit. I also emphasized to Congress that only a very small percentage of UAP reports display signatures that could reasonably be described as anomalous. The majority of unidentified objects reported to AERO and in our holdings demonstrate mundane characteristics of readily explainable sources. While a large number of cases in AERO's holdings remain technically unresolved, this is primarily due to a lack of data associated with those cases, very much along the lines of what David was just speaking about. Without sufficient data, we are unable to reach defendable conclusions that meet the high scientific standards we set for resolution. Meanwhile, for the few objects that do demonstrate potentially anomalous characteristics, AERO is approaching these cases with the highest level of objectivity and analytic rigor. This includes physical testing and employing modeling and simulation to validate our analyses and the underlying theories, and then peer reviewing those results before reaching any conclusions. AERO has shared these cases with the appropriately cleared NASA team members in order to discuss and help recommend potential scientific areas of study that NASA may want to take lead on. I'll underscore here, as I did before Congress, that AERO's work will take time if we are committed to doing it right. AERO is committed to the highest standards of scientific research integrity, as we know our partners at NASA are as well. Thanks again to NASA for hosting this public forum for UAP discussion and information exchange. And I'd like to turn to a brief presentation that includes some recently declassified footage and trends for discussion. Next slide, please. So some of you probably saw a version of this at the open hearing last month. This is an overall review of all of the analytic trends of all the cases that we have to date. While the numbers may have changed a little bit, the overall trends remain the same. Most of what we are seeing reported by aircraft are at the altitudes where we fly aircraft. That should not be a surprise. You will note, however, that I have no space reports and I have no maritime reports. That is notable, even though we are looking across all of those domains. On the upper right, we have UAP morphologies. The vast majority of what has been reported and what we have data on, a little less than half now, are orbs, round spheres. And in the bottom right, you will see in the heat map of the areas where we get most of our reporting. This is very much a collection biased map. This is where our sensors are, our military, NRIC, and some of the FAA data. In the middle, it is what we call our typical UAP characteristics for the vast majority of the cases that we see. One way of looking at that is a we'll call it a target package. This is the thing we are out hunting for in most cases. Next slide, please. This is an example of one that I showed at the hearing recently. This is a spherical orb, metallic, in the Middle East, 2022, by an MQ-9. I will come back to the sensor question that David raised here in a moment. This is a typical example of the thing that we see most of. We see these all over the world, and we see these in making very interesting apparent maneuvers. This one in particular, however, I would point out, demonstrated no enigmatic technical capabilities and was no threat to airborne safety. While we are still looking at it, I don't have any more data other than that. And so being able to come to some conclusion is going to take time until we can get better resolved data on similar objects that we can then do a larger analysis on. Next slide, please. I'm going to let this play through. This is a newly released video. You'll notice there are two dots moving back and forth. There is a plane at the bottom that's moving across the screen, and now there are three dots moving back and forth. The moving back and forth is from the sensor and the platform that's collecting it. This is a P3 on a training mission in the Western United States. They picked these up and they tried to intercept and was unable to intercept them. Apart from that motion, and you'll see a little bit of defocusing from the sensor itself, there is no other oddity about this, except for the fact that they couldn't catch them. The reason they couldn't catch them is because after further analysis, it was shown that those objects were actually much farther away from the P3 than they thought. And in fact, when we went even deeper, looked at air traffic control data, we were able to match those to aircraft on a major flight corridor heading into a major airport for landing. This is the kind of thing that can spoof and or provide misperception of both very highly trained pilots as well as sensors, right? And this was reported as an odd grouping of 3 UAP. All right. That is not to say that the pilots didn't know what they were looking at, or they knew what they were looking at, but they weren't really sure. But it also is meant to say that when they're not sure, they're reporting it now, and that's what they're supposed to be doing. And then we have to go look at it. Next slide, please. That brings us to really what is Aero doing in the science and technical realm. So this is one of those areas that I'm going to expound a little bit more on than we did in the last hearings. Aero has a robust scientific plan that we are required to then provide to Congress here pretty soon. One of the first things that we're doing is looking across all the existing sensor data against that typical UAP target that I gave you up at the very first slide. That goes beyond DoD and IC sensors. That's commercial, that's civil, that's and with partnership with NASA sensors and NOAA sensors. Understanding if any of these Earth sensing satellites, any of these airborne platforms, any of these ground radars, whether it's FAA or other, can actually see these things, given what we've got so far, is going to be an important first step to understanding which sensors are going to be relevant. From there, we are augmenting with dedicated sensors that we've purpose-built, designed to detect, track, and characterize those particular objects. We will be then putting those out in very select areas for surveillance purposes. Partnerships with academia, exploring the signatures to match to our data. So understanding if a thing is moving and if it is doing certain anomalous activities, what are the signatures we would expect to see? How do we pull on that? And then from there, how do I tune my collection architecture to go after it? Statistical analytic techniques. We're working with a couple of universities on how do I do broader-based statistical analysis on unclassified and classified data so that I can apply those analytics to our holdings. and then AI and ML analytic techniques for searching out through the data what are the objects, what are the targets that we're going after. We have partnerships with both DoD and DOE labs to explore our current state-of-the-art fundamental physics of UAP observations, both current and historical. In other words, if I have objects, those few that are doing some things that are anomalous, what is our current understanding of maneuverability, speed, signature management, propulsion? What are those underlying signatures that we would expect to see, and how do I then pull on that? Our interagency and allied partnerships for calibration of our capabilities. This is exactly what David was pointing at. A vast majority of what we have reported to us are DoD sensors. DoD sensors are not scientific sensors. They are not intelligence community sensors. Believe it or not, intelligence community sensors are very close to scientific sensors. They are calibrated, they are high precision, they are everything you'd ever want to know about a thing. DoD sensors have one purpose. They are to identify an object that is known and put a weapon on it. That is what they're for, right, predominantly. So understanding how do you calibrate those against these known objects? How do I fly an F-35 against a weather balloon at different speeds and different altitudes and different sun conditions and different lighting conditions and heating conditions? Those are all important measurements that need to be done, and we are in process of doing that right now. That table on the right is a very simplified version of our entire test matrix, which you would not be able to fit on 3 of these slides against all of our sensors across all of those phenomenologies. That will be useful in order to then train our operators, pilots, and sensors against the known objects. And then finally, our pattern of life analysis. This is essentially baselining what is normal. I have all these hotspot areas, but we only have hotspot areas because that's when the reports come in from the operators that are operating at that time. They don't operate all the time. So to have a 24/7 collection monitoring campaign in some of these areas for 3 months at a time is going to be necessary in order to measure out what is normal. Then I'll know what is not normal, right, when we have additional things that come through those spaces. And that includes space and maritime. Next slide, please. Which brings me to some of my recommendations for the panel and their consideration and deliberation. Some of these we're going to be exploring with our new NASA embed, whom I'm happy to be welcoming on pretty soon, who's going to help us in our scientific plan. Crowdsourcing unclassified open source data. This is where, some of the public can be helpful. Imagery from an iPhone is generally not helpful unless you are right up on whatever it is you're looking at. However, some of the ancillary data that your iPhone provides, from location to speed to other phenomenologies, and more than one of those can be very helpful. Right? Large-scale, ground-based scientific instrumentation. Evaluating how can I use some of these other instruments for detection. The FRB example was perfect, right? You have a bunch of large-scale instruments that were not designed for that, yet they picked them up because there was a microwave. Well, we have a surrogate target package of what we think these things are, at least from what we've got reported to us. That was in the front slide. Understanding how can I evaluate that against all of these other instruments, and do any of them have a chance of picking anything up that would be helpful in tipping and cueing us to get other sensors on target. I think leading that evaluation of the scientific ground-based sensors would be useful. Also, the same thing for the Earth Sciences satellites, as we mentioned before. Intentional vice coincidental collection. So looking at how can I provide a tip and cue to both the ground and space-based scientific and academic sensor community to put additional sensors on a object when it is reported. I'm currently doing that with Aero, the Joint Staff, the commands for when they get tipping cue, right? So a pilot says something, they see something, they report it in, and we're going to turn on a whole bunch of new collection to go after it. I should be able to hand that same tip and cue to the scientific and academic community. So looking at how that works would be helpful. Peer reviewing advanced capabilities, the parameterization and the publication of that have not yet been engineered. We understand a lot of fundamental physics. It is the scientific community's responsibility to explore and document those fundamentals in peer-reviewed scientific journals to match to data so that we can weed out all kinds of different hypotheses, right? That's how science works. We need to make sure that we are doing that. I think leading that conversation would be very helpful from NASA's perspective. Archived scientific data. So we have a whole bunch of calibrated, large-scale scientific data from all these different instrumentations around the world. Taking a look at how can you apply maybe some AI, ML tools to search through that data for anomalous signatures that may correlate to things that we've got reporting on. That would be an interesting study. Distributions of sightings. I think this is a low-hanging fruit one, right? So if we take a look at all of the distributions of sightings that are outside of my national security areas that I've got classified reporting for, and they generate the similar distribution map as we've got, and we put those two pieces together, now I have a holistic picture. And then, of course, our foreign partnerships, building a robust scientific community of interest to review data, capabilities, conduct analysis, expanding upon our military and intelligence collaborations across the world into the scientific and academic world. And with that, those were my thoughts. We've talked about some of these in the past. It would be interesting to hear if there's any further questions or deliberations on any of those points, and I'm happy to take any questions that you all have.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Kirkpatrick. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank you and the AARO for your openness in providing this committee with insight and information about what you've learned so far, how we could work together. I think this is very much an area where it's going to be essential that NASA be a partner and be a good partner for AARO, and I think you're really want to thank you for your role with this committee in helping to start to build that partnership.
It's been my pleasure.
And let's, Reggie.
Hey, Sean, thanks for the briefing. Question. We talked a lot about data already. Let's talk about sensors for a second. So you mentioned that you work with labs, academia. Do you see a need to go beyond what you mentioned earlier? That is the type of sensors we have right now, which are based on national security threats and certain phenomenologies and frequency ranges, these kinds of things. Do you see a reason of going beyond that?
Yep,
And
absolutely.
So what are some of the challenges you see there, materials or what have you?
So can we go back to the front slide, just the first slide where the target characterization is? So we've purpose-built a couple of sensors to do search across that. Nope, down one. There you go. That's great. To go down some of those characteristics to see if we can find them correlated to pilot reporting. Right. Some of those are initially, this is going to be, I'm going to say this is a bootstrap method, right? We're doing a broad spectrum search across very few indicators that we can point to that will enable us to get a little bit more data, refine that, narrow those sensors and go from there. So we aren't just relying on the DoD and IC sensors that exist today because frankly they don't point to where we want them to point, right? I mean, I'll be frank with everyone. We can point the largest collection apparatus in the entire globe at any point we want. You just have to tell me where I want to point it. Second piece of that is a lot of what we have is is around the continental United States. Most people, including the government, don't like it when I point our entire collection apparatus to your backyard, right? It's not allowed. We have some laws about that, and we've got to figure out how to do this only in the areas that I can get high confidence there's going to be something there, and high confidence I'm not going to break any laws doing it. Right? So there's a trade there. So some of these ground-based point detectors are going to be necessary for that, to point up, to point out, to search. Coupled with, we're evaluating a number of sensor opportunities across different organizations, academia, industry, whatnot, that already exist or are being built for similar purposes, or maybe other purposes that I might be able to recalibrate for this and see if those will have a chance of seeing that target, right? So that's where the modeling and sim comes in. Can I take that target, put it into your sensor, and have a chance of seeing it? If I can, then I might want to use that. Right. Oh, wait.
Who's next?
Are you? Go.
Thanks, Sean. I have the questions you probably don't want, which are about numbers, unless I missed them during your presentation. You had said that only a very small percentage of your cases display signatures that could be anomalous, and then followed that up with the few objects that do demonstrate potentially anomalous characteristics. What numbers are we talking about? How big is your database? How many years was it collected over? And were those observations made? And then by few, what do you mean?
Right. No, that's a great question. So this chart, as I mentioned, we've updated with our current data holdings. At the time of my open hearing, we were at 650 cases-ish. We are now over 800. We are putting together our annual report, which will be due August 1 to the Hill. And in it, and there will be an unclassified version, as there always has been, we will have those updated numbers at that time. We roughly get, I mean, you can do the math, you know, it depends anywhere from 50 to 100-ish new reports a month. Now, the reason we had such a big jump recently is because I got FAA's data integrated in finally, and so we ended up with like 100 and some odd new cases. So there's reason why it's going to fluctuate. The numbers that I would say, so we're gonna try to do a little more fidelity on some of the analytics when we report out. But the numbers I would say that we see are possibly really anomalous are less than single-digit percentages of that total database. So maybe 2 to 5-ish%. Wait.
Who's next?
Is this on? Hi.
All right.
I'll stand up because
I'm
I'm
gonna
on
get
the
to
other end of the room. Thanks, Sean, for your presentation and for some of the video footage that we saw. While we're all good scientists on this panel, I think that I look at it with an untrained eye of looking at that video. And so I see 3 spots moving and everything else in the background looks like it's stable. Can you talk a little bit more about either the sensor platform or what we're seeing that's stable in the background? Because they've been identified as airplanes, and there's clear description of from other data sources that came in to help clarify that. But when I look at this, what are all of the white spots in the background that we're seeing that are stable?
So those are that's a star background. Pretty sure that's a star background. Now, so you're looking at those planes were roughly 30 to 40-ish miles away, if I remember correctly. And when you see that smaller plane that comes in at the bottom, that one was much, much closer. It was like maybe 6 to 10 miles away, right? And so the jitter in the sensor is what you're looking at.
Right, okay, so the 3 spots, because they look like they're moving at about the same,
Right, they are.
right? And if they were flying together, but they're not, is what I'm hearing. This is the sensor moving.
They're in a flight line,
Right,
so they're equally spaced in a flight line, and the sensor is jittering.
thank you,
Yes,
appreciate that.
yes. Wait,
Next.
Walter's been waiting.
Patiently waiting. Okay, if you go to your first slide, if you don't mind, not the title slide, but the one
trends
that had
slide,
the trends,
please.
yeah. It's the previous slide.
There you go. Thank you.
So I want to make sure I understand the slide. It says typically reported characteristics, and there are a bunch of things here, like, for example, size, altitude, speed. If it's being observed from a single sensor, use the example of like the airplanes that were coming in, and if you don't know how far away they are, how do you assess the size?
Correct.
How do you assess the speed? This is what people would report, but it isn't necessarily,
What
for
is
example,
real.
the size of the object or the speed or any of the rest of it. Do I understand that correctly?
Partially.
Okay.
So this is not all single sensor observations. Some of these are very much multi-sensor observations.
Okay.
And this is parameterized to cover the range of things for any given parameter, the range of what's possible and what has been observed.
Okay, and then on the next slide, the one where you've got the, whatever
Orb.
it is, the meatball moving across the screen.
Right, that one.
So was there any look at sensor artifact, data processing artifact? I mean, the first thing that, whenever I see anything that's anomalous, I look at how was the data collected.
Yeah. So yes, these are so this is an EO sensor on an MQ-9, and we understand that very, very well. And so that is a real object, absolutely. Anna Marie.
You mentioned that in partnership with academia, you also use AI ML techniques for existing data sets, possibly some of them open source. Can you explain a little bit more what kind of AI ML techniques you're using? Are these about anomaly detection? Are you using anything related to natural language processing? Are you using anything related to computer vision?
Right. So we're looking at a number of different capabilities that span, I think, a lot of what you've just said. So we've got, we haven't applied it yet. We are researching how we're going to apply it. So natural language processing for the reports from pilots, absolutely. All right. Target recognition. So I can train a model to look for that thing and go back through all of our holdings and go, give me how many of these you have, right? And then try to figure out what those are. Right? So I have not put anything out there yet, or have not looked at anything yet for active targeting in real time, because I don't know exactly what I would train it to go look for. I just know what we have. So I want to get more confidence on what we have before I go and do that, except for balloons, right? We're trying to get rid of balloons as quickly as possible.
So, Sean, I just wanted to begin by thanking you for your service to this nation, this committee. You don't exactly have the easiest job in Washington. So
No, I do not.
appreciate it.
I'm glad you recognize that.
Yes, we certainly do. I also want to commend you noting the international partnerships. Spain just signed the Artemis Accords yesterday, increasing the membership to 25. I think that's a global partnership that you could leverage. Only 170 more countries to go, NASA, before they have everyone signed up. I just have two questions. One, relative to what Nadia was asking you about the number of anomalous phenomena. What makes it anomalous in your view? What is the phenomenology where you're pulling those cases out and saying this is truly unexplained? And then my second question would be relative to the stigma. How damaging is that in your view? And what in particular do you think NASA can do to help remedy the situation?
Those are great questions. I'm going to take the second one first because I know we're getting short on time. the stigma has improved significantly over the years since the Navy first took this on some years ago. It is not gone, and in fact, I would argue the stigma exists inside the leadership of all of our buildings, right, wherever that is. My team and I have also been subject to lots of harassment, especially coming out of my last hearing, because people don't understand the scientific method and why we have to do the things we have to do, right? And because we can't just come out and say, you know, the greatest thing that could happen to me is I could come out and say, hey, I know where all these things are. Here you go, right? But I don't, right? And it's going to take us time to research all that. People want answers now, and so they're actually feeding the stigma by exhibiting that kind of behavior to all of us, right? That is a bad thing. Where can NASA help? I made that recommendation on NASA should lead the scientific discourse. We need to elevate this conversation. Right? We need to have this conversation in an open environment like this where we aren't going to get harassed. Because this is a hard problem. It is a hard target problem. We need to understand what is the things that are in all of our domains, space or air or undersea, and how do we make sense of that? Right. Your first question on what makes it anomalous to me, we actually developed some definitions on all of these things. We gave it both to the White House and to Congress. I think we've got some of that into law now, but essentially anomalous is anything that is not readily understandable by the operator or the sensor. Right? So it is doing something weird, whether that's maneuvering against the wind at Mach 2 with no apparent propulsion, or it's going into the water, which we have shown is not the case. That is actually a sensor anomaly that we've now figured out, and we're going to be publishing all of that. You know, those kinds of things make anomalous. Signature, we'll call it signature management, but it's things that are not readily understandable in the context of, hey, I've got a thing that's out in the light. It should reflect a certain amount of light. If it doesn't reflect that amount of light, something weird.
I think we have time for one last question.
Sean, you recommended foreign partnership with NASA. I'm curious, especially given your map, have you, as Aero, partnered with international agencies, and is there ways for reporting to your?
Mm-hmm. So that's a great question. I want to expound on that just a little bit. So I have just held our first Five Eyes forum on this subject last week, I think it was, or earlier this week. I don't know. Dan was there, and we have, we've entered into discussions with our partners on data sharing. How do they do reporting? What kind of analysis can they help us with? What kind of calibration can they help us with? What can we help them with? And we're establishing all of that right now. And they're going to end up, sending their information and data to us to feed into the process that we've laid out for how we're going to do all of this. Beyond that, I have not had either the time or the bandwidth to do, and that's why I would look to NASA to expand the scientific and academic relationships that they have across all of our allies and partners on how can we bring them into the fold. That's where I think there's a lot of benefit to NASA taking lead on that.
Great. Thank you. But one just clarifications for people who don't know, what are the Five Eyes?
Oh, I'm sorry. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Five Eyes, those are that's the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. So those are the 5 partners.
Terrific. So thank you very much.
Thank you.